Richard Harrison's billion-dollar merger call was dying on the line. Lawyers were fumbling, objections mounting. His tech empire was crumbling before his eyes. Eleanor Vance, his secretary, stepped quietly into his office. She'd overheard the legal clause they were stuck on. She tried to hand him a file, a relevant case law she knew. Harrison's head snapped up, his face a mask of fury and panic. "What is this, Ellie? You think I pay you to think?" He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Stick to coffee and scheduling, sweetheart. Leave the real work to the men who understand it." He waved her away, turning back to his disastrous call, slamming the door between them. He didn't see the look in her eyes. He didn't know Ellie held a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law, graduating top of her class. He didn't know she'd aced the bar, but couldn't land an associate position at any firm that saw her name, or her face. He didn't know she took this job, swallowing her pride just to keep the lights on while she paid off crippling student loans. Harrison thought he'd just dismissed his secretary. He had no idea the woman whose legal mind outclassed everyone in his company was the only one who could save him. His empire was burning, and the fire extinguisher was waiting right outside his door.
What would you do if the person you disrespected the most turned out to be the only one who could save you? This is the story of Richard Harrison, CEO, millionaire, and a man who was about to lose everything in exactly 48 hours. And this is Eleanor Vance, his secretary, a Harvard Law graduate, and the only person standing between him and total ruin. But he didn't know that yet. And when he found out, well, let's just say assumptions can cost you $1 billion. This is a story about prejudice, redemption, and the moment one man realized that the person he looked down on was actually looking out for him all along.
Monday morning. Harrison Technologies headquarters, 47th floor. Richard Harrison sat in his corner office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and he was about to have the worst day of his career. His company was dying. 3 years of bad decisions and failed products had brought Harrison Technologies to its knees. The $1.2 billion merger with Bright Future International, a consortium of German and Korean tech firms, was his last chance to save everything. And right now, on a conference call with his $5 million legal team, he was watching that chance slip away. Harrison's lawyer, Jerry, delivered the bad news over speakerphone. The international partners were backing out. They were citing Clause 3B of the International Trade Compliance Agreement, claiming the IP transfer violated German data sovereignty laws. Harrison exploded. He didn't care about their legal objections. He wanted solutions, not excuses. The deal had to close by Wednesday, or the entire company would collapse. Jerry tried to explain that the German interpretation of data transfer protocols was complex, that they needed to find the right legal precedent to counter the opposing counsel's arguments. But Harrison wasn't interested in explanations. He was watching $1 billion deal circle the drain, and his expensive legal team was telling him they were still researching. That's when Eleanor Vance walked into his office. Ellie, as she preferred to be called, was 29 years old, impeccably dressed, and always composed. She'd been Harrison's secretary for 18 months, quiet, efficient, nearly invisible in the way that Harrison preferred his support staff to be. She approached his desk with a file in her hands. "Mr. Harrison," she said calmly, "I have the Bergman vs. Datacorp case file. It's a 2019 European court decision that addressed nearly identical data sovereignty concerns in a cross-border merger." She placed the papers on his desk and continued, explaining that the legal precedent the opposing counsel was citing could be countered. The Bergman case established that if the data transfer included a reciprocal sovereignty clause with explicit consent protocols, the German interpretation didn't apply in the way they were arguing. Harrison looked up at her, and for a moment he was speechless. Then he laughed, a condescending, incredulous laugh. I'm sorry, what? He said. Ellie started to explain again, but Harrison cut her off. Okay, stop. Just stop right there. He leaned back in his chair, still laughing, and his voice took on that tone, the one that made it clear he thought he was being generous by even listening. Ellie, sweetheart, I appreciate the effort, really. But maybe stick to what you know. Coffee. Scheduling my meetings. Ordering lunch. There was an uncomfortable silence. Ellie stood there, professional as always, but something flickered in her eyes. Mr. Harrison, she said quietly, I was just trying to help. Harrison's voice hardened. Leave the thinking to the people with actual law degrees, Jerry went to Yale. My legal team has decades of experience. You're very good at answering phones, but this is way above your pay grade. Then came the comment that would haunt him. Now, can you get me a coffee? Black. Like you should keep your opinions. The words hung in the air. Harrison probably didn't even think twice about them. Just another dismissive remark to someone he considered beneath him. Just another casual cruelty wrapped in a smile. Ellie took a breath, nodded once, and turned toward the door. And close the door on your way out, Harrison added. The adults are talking. The door closed, and Harrison returned to his conference call, completely unaware that he had just humiliated the one person who could save him. What Harrison didn't know, what he never bothered to learn, was that Eleanor Vance had graduated from Harvard Law School in the top 15% of her class. She'd been on law review. She'd clerked for a federal judge. She'd passed the bar on her first attempt with flying colors. And she couldn't get a single law firm to hire her. Let's go back 2 years. Eleanor Vance had just graduated from Harvard Law, full of hope and ready to change the world. Her credentials were stellar. Her recommendations were glowing. She should have had firms competing to hire her. But that's not what happened. Instead, she sent out 63 applications. She got 42 interviews. She made it to 17 final rounds. And she received 0 offers. The reasons were always dressed up in corporate language. We're looking for someone with a more traditional background. We've decided to go with a candidate who's a better cultural fit. Our clients expect a certain look, I'm sure you understand. But Ellie understood perfectly. The message was clear. Brilliant black woman with a Harvard Law degree? Yes, very impressive. But not for us. Meanwhile, her bills were piling up. $200,000 in student loans. Her mother's mounting medical expenses. Her younger brother's overdue college tuition. She needed a job. Any job. So when Harrison Technologies posted an opening for an executive secretary, she applied. She told herself it was temporary. Just until she could get her foot in the door somewhere. Just until she could prove herself. That was 18 months ago. Every day, she sat outside Harrison's office, answering his phones, scheduling his meetings, and watching him treat the people around him with varying degrees of contempt. She filed legal documents she could have written better. She sat in on conference calls where lawyers made arguments she could have dismantled. She kept her head down, did her job, and quietly kept her legal knowledge sharp, reading cases at night, following corporate law developments, hoping that someday, somehow, she'd get another chance. She never expected that chance would come from the man who just told her to stick to making coffee. Back in his office, Harrison was still on the phone with Jerry, still pacing, still yelling. The German legal framework was complex, Jerry insisted. They needed at least 48 hours to research properly. We don't have 48 hours, Harrison shouted. The partners arrive Wednesday morning for the final signing. If we haven't resolved this by then, they walk. Jerry sighed over the speakerphone. Without the right precedent, they couldn't counter the opposing counsel's objection. And finding that precedent was like finding a needle in a haystack. Harrison felt his chest tighten. The deal was dying. His company was dying. Everything he'd built was about to collapse, and his $5 million legal team was telling him they couldn't do their job. Get your team working around the clock, he barked into the phone. I want answers by tomorrow morning or I'm finding new counsel. He slammed the phone down and sat back in his Italian leather chair, $3,000, he'd paid for it, and stared at the ceiling. A few minutes later, there was a quiet knock on his door. Ellie entered with his coffee, placing it carefully on his desk. "Your coffee, Mr. Harrison," she said softly. "Fine. Leave it." But Ellie didn't leave. She stood there, and Harrison could feel her presence. He looked up, annoyed. "Was there something else?" Ellie hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Mr. Harrison, I know you told me to stay out of it, but I couldn't help overhearing the call. The issue with Clause 3b is based on a misinterpretation of the German data protection framework." "Ellie." Harrison's voice carried a warning. But she pushed forward. "The opposing counsel is citing the 2018 amendments to the GDPR, but they're ignoring the 2020 clarification in the Digital Services Act that explicitly addresses cross-border mergers where both parties establish reciprocal data governance structures with independent oversight mechanisms." Harrison stood up, his voice rising. "Okay, stop. Just stop right there. This is a billion-dollar deal with incredibly complex international law. This is not something you can just Google and figure out." Ellie met his eyes, calm and steady. "I didn't Google it, Mr. Harrison. I studied it. International corporate law was my focus at Harvard Law School." The office went completely silent. Harrison stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "What did you just say?" "I have a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School," Ellie said simply. "I specialized in international corporate transactions and intellectual property law. I passed the bar 2 years ago." Harrison blinked. Once. Twice. His brain was trying to process what he'd just heard. "You're a lawyer?" "Yes, sir." Harrison shook his head, letting out an incredulous laugh. "Then what the hell are you doing answering my phones?" There was a pause, just a moment, before Ellie answered with quiet dignity. "Because no one would hire me to do anything else." The words landed like a punch. Harrison stood there, looking at this woman he'd dismissed, insulted, and disrespected for 18 months, and suddenly nothing made sense. But before he could respond, his phone rang again. It was Jerry, and the news was worse. The international partners had just sent an email. They were giving Harrison one more chance, a conference call in 2 hours to resolve the legal objections. If they couldn't satisfy the German and Korean counsel on this call, the deal was dead. Harrison's hands were shaking as he hung up the phone. He looked at Ellie, still standing in his office, and made a decision that went against every instinct, every prejudice, every assumption he'd ever held. "Get on the call with me," he said. Ellie's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Harrison? You heard me. 2 hours. Conference room. And Ellie?" He paused, swallowing his pride. "Bring everything you have on that Bergman case." For the first time in 18 months, Richard Harrison was about to see what Eleanor Vance could really do. And nothing would ever be the same. 2 hours later, Harrison sat in the main conference room, surrounded by his legal team, 5 lawyers from the most expensive firm in the city, all looking nervous and uncomfortable. Jerry was on speakerphone, and next to Harrison, in a chair he never expected her to occupy, sat Eleanor Vance. She had her laptop open, several files spread in front of her, and that same calm, composed expression she always wore. But Harrison noticed something different now, the way she held herself, the confidence in her posture. This wasn't the quiet secretary who brought him coffee. This was someone else entirely. "Just stay quiet unless I ask you to speak," Harrison whispered to her, his voice tight with anxiety. "Let me handle the introductions." Ellie nodded once. The video call connected, and suddenly the screen was filled with faces, the German legal team from Bright Future International, led by Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, a stern-looking man in his 60s. Next to him was the Korean representative, Ms. Park Ji-won, equally serious. Behind them sat teams of lawyers, all looking ready for battle. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Reinhardt began, his English perfect but heavily accented. "We have agreed to this call as a courtesy. But I must be frank, our position has not changed. Clause 3b presents an insurmountable obstacle to this merger. Harrison cleared his throat. Dr. Reinhardt, Ms. Park, I appreciate you taking the time. I have my full legal team here, and we believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding the German data sovereignty requirements. Jerry jumped in over the speakerphone, launching into a lengthy explanation about data transfer protocols and EU regulations. Harrison watched as the German and Korean lawyers exchanged glances, polite, patient, but clearly unimpressed. 10 minutes in, Dr. Reinhardt interrupted. Mr. Harrison, with all respect to your counsel, this is exactly the same argument we rejected yesterday. The Bundesdatenschutzgesetz, the German Federal Data Protection Act, is very clear on this matter. When personal data of German citizens is transferred to a non-EU entity, even in the context of a corporate merger, the sovereignty requirements are absolute unless there's an established precedent for reciprocal governance structures, Ellie said quietly. Every head in the room turned to her. On the screen, Dr. Reinhardt stopped mid-sentence. I'm sorry, he said slowly. Who is speaking? Harrison's lawyers looked panicked. Jerry's voice came through the speaker, confused and irritated. Richard, who was that? Harrison's mouth was dry. He looked at Ellie, who met his gaze with a slight nod. She was ready. This is Eleanor, Vance, Harrison said, his voice stronger than he felt. She's part of my legal team. Dr. Reinhardt leaned forward, peering at the screen. Ms. Vance, you were saying something about reciprocal governance? Ellie straightened in her chair. When she spoke, her voice was clear, confident, and precise. Yes, Dr. Reinhardt. Your team is citing the 2018 GDPR amendments and the Federal Data Protection Act as barriers to the data transfer inherent in this merger. But I believe you're overlooking the 2019 European Court of Justice decision in Bergman v. Datacorp, which established that when both parties in a cross-border merger create a reciprocal data governance structure with independent oversight, the transfer is not considered a sovereignty violation under German law. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Dr. Reinhardt's eyebrows rose. You are familiar with Bergman? Yes, sir. The case involved a Dutch technology firm merging with a Canadian company. The German court initially blocked the transfer of German customer data, citing the same sovereignty concerns you're raising now. But the European Court overturned that decision, ruling that if both entities establish, and this is the key language, equivalent protective frameworks with transparent, independent audit mechanisms accessible to EU regulatory bodies, then the data sovereignty requirements are satisfied. Ms. Park spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. That case involved different circumstances. Different industries, different data types. Actually, Ellie interrupted politely. The data types were remarkably similar. Both cases involved technical specifications, user behavior analytics, and proprietary algorithms, all classified as sensitive commercial data under EU law. The court specifically addressed the question of whether technology sector mergers could meet the reciprocal governance standard, and they ruled affirmatively. She pulled up a document on her laptop and her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. I'm sharing my screen now. This is paragraph 47 of the Bergman decision, where Justice Mueller explicitly states that data sovereignty concerns cannot be used to block otherwise legitimate mergers if both parties demonstrate commitment to equivalent protection standards. The German lawyers were now huddled together, speaking rapidly in German. Harrison watched, barely breathing, as Dr. Reinhardt pulled out his own laptop and began typing. One of Harrison's lawyers, a man named Stevens who'd been with the firm for 20 years, leaned over and whispered harshly. Richard, who I asked this woman? Where did you find her? Harrison didn't answer. He was watching Ellie, watching the way she navigated the legal database with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, watching the way she anticipated the next question before it was even asked. Dr. Reinhardt looked up from his screen. Ms. Vance, I have the Bergman decision in front of me. You are correct about paragraph 47. However, the court also required, in paragraph 52, that the reciprocal framework includes specific provisions for data localization in cases of regulatory investigation. Our initial review of your merger proposal showed no such provisions. That's true, Ellie said immediately. The current draft is missing those provisions. But they can be added. In fact, if you look at the Bergman implementation, specifically the Memorandum of Understanding that the parties filed with the European Commission 30 days after the ruling, there's template language that could be adapted for our purposes. She pulled up another document. Here. This is the MOU from Bergman. Section 7, subsection C. It establishes a regulatory response protocol that ensures data can be localized within 72 hours of any official investigation request, with independent verification from a mutually agreed-upon auditor. Ms. Park leaned forward, studying the document on her own screen. And you believe this language could be incorporated into our merger agreement? Not just incorporated, Ellie said. Improved. The Bergman MOU was drafted in 2019, before the 2020 Digital Services Act clarifications. We now have better guidance on what constitutes adequate localization protocols. I could draft an addendum to Clause 3B that includes the Bergman framework plus the updated DSA requirements. It would actually provide stronger protections than what either party originally proposed. The room was completely silent except for the sound of keyboards clicking as the German and Korean lawyers frantically took notes and pulled up the cases Ellie was citing. Jerry's voice came through the speaker, strained and confused. Richard, I need to speak with you privately. Not now, Jerry, Harrison said, his eyes never leaving the screen. Dr. Reinhardt conferred with his team in German for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he turned back to the camera. Ms. Vance, your analysis is impressive. Very impressive. However, even if we accept the Bergman precedent as applicable, there is still the matter of the Korean regulatory framework. Our Korean partners have concerns about intellectual property transfers that go beyond EU data protection law. Ms. Park nodded sharply. Yes. The Korean Fair Trade Commission has specific requirements for technology transfers that involve source code and proprietary algorithms. Your current proposal does not address these requirements adequately. Harrison felt his stomach drop. They'd been so focused on the German objections that the Korean issues had taken a back seat. He opened his mouth to ask Jerry for help, but before he could speak, Ellie was already responding. Ms. Park, you're referring to the 2021 amendments to the Korean Technology Transfer Act, correct? The provisions that require clear delineation between transferred IP and retained proprietary knowledge? Ms. Park's expression shifted from skeptical to surprised. You are familiar with Korean technology law? I wrote my third-year paper at Harvard on East Asian IP frameworks in cross-border M&A transactions, Ellie said. The Korean amendments were a major focus. The KFTC's concern is primarily about ensuring that transferred technology doesn't create unfair competitive advantages or monopolistic control. But there's established case law, specifically the 2022 Supreme Court ruling in Samsung versus the KFTC, that clarifies how technology transfers can be structured to satisfy those concerns. She pulled up yet another document. The Samsung case established a three-part test: clear documentation of all transferred IP, establishment of firewall protocols to protect non-transferred proprietary knowledge, and regular compliance audits by an independent Korean entity. If we structure the IP transfer provisions in our merger to meet this three-part test, the KFTC concerns should be resolved. Ms. Park was now typing rapidly, her previous skepticism replaced by focused attention. She spoke quickly in Korean to her team, then turned back to the camera. Ms. Vance, the Samsung case you cite, can you specify which aspects of our current proposal failed to meet the three-part test? And just like that, Ellie was off and running. For the next 40 minutes, she walked through the merger agreement line by line, identifying every potential legal obstacle and providing specific solutions drawn from international case law. She cited German cases, Korean precedents, EU regulations, and even referenced a Japanese arbitration decision that had implications for the intellectual property provisions. Harrison's expensive legal team sat in stunned silence. Jerry had stopped interjecting entirely. And the international partners, the ones who'd been ready to walk away forever, were leaning forward, taking notes, asking follow-up questions, treating Ellie with the kind of respect usually reserved for senior partners at prestigious firms. Dr. Reinhardt finally held up his hand. Ms. Vance, I must stop you here. Not because your analysis is wrong, quite the opposite. But my team needs time to review the precedents you've cited and discuss internally. Of course, Ellie said graciously. However, Dr. Reinhardt continued, a slight smile appearing on his stern face, I must say, in 30 years of international corporate law, I have rarely encountered such comprehensive command of multi-jurisdictional frameworks. May I ask where you received your training? Harvard Law School, Ellie said simply. Class of 2023. Dr. Reinhardt nodded slowly, as if something had just clicked into place. Harvard. Yes. That explains the precision. Ms. Vance, my team will review your proposed solutions and prepare a response. I believe, and this is not a commitment, Mr. Harrison, but I believe we may have a path forward. Ms. Park added. I agree. This is the first truly substantive progress we've made. Mr. Harrison, I suggest we schedule a follow-up call for tomorrow morning. Ms. Vance, I trust you will be available to join? Of course, Harrison said quickly, finding his voice. Ellie will be on every call from now on. The video conference ended, and the screen went black. For a long moment, nobody in the conference room moved. Then Stevens, the senior lawyer, let out a long breath. What just happened? Jerry's voice came through the speaker, tight and professional but clearly rattled. Richard, I need to speak with you about your legal team structure. Later, Jerry, Harrison said, and disconnected the call. He turned to Ellie, who was calmly closing her laptop and organizing her files, as if she hadn't just saved $1 billion deal that an entire team of expensive lawyers couldn't salvage. Ellie, Harrison said slowly, we need to talk. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something in her eyes, not defiance exactly, but a quiet strength that had always been there, that he'd simply been too blind to see. Yes, Mr. Harrison? He gestured to the other lawyers. Everyone out. Now. The legal team filed out quickly, whispering among themselves. When the door closed, Harrison and Ellie were alone. I need to know everything, Harrison said. Harvard Law. Top of your class. All of this. He gestured at her laptop, at the now empty screen where she just demolished every legal objection from international counsel. And you're working as my secretary? Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then she began to talk. For the next 15 minutes, Eleanor Vance told Richard Harrison her story. And it was a story he should have known, should have asked about, should have cared enough to learn 18 months ago. She told him about graduating from Harvard Law in the top 15% of her class. About making law review, an honor that less than 10% of students achieved. About her clerkship with Judge Patricia Williams, a federal judge known for her brilliant legal mind. She told him about the interviews. 63 applications to top law firms across the country. The initial excitement when they saw Harvard Law on her resume. Then the subtle shift when she walked into the room, the almost imperceptible change in the interviewer's expressions, the coded language about cultural fit and client expectations. She told him about being passed over, again and again, for candidates with less impressive credentials. About watching her white male classmates, some of whom she'd tutored through difficult courses, get multiple offers from firms that rejected her without explanation. There was one firm, Ellie said quietly, where I made it to the final round. The senior partner told me I was the most impressive candidate they'd interviewed. Then he said their biggest client, a major international corporation, preferred to work with lawyers who looked the part. He actually apologized to me. Said it wasn't fair, but that's how the industry works. Harrison listened, feeling something uncomfortable twist in his gut. How many times had he made similar judgments? How many times had he dismissed someone's competence based on how they looked rather than what they knew? By the time I got to your job posting, Ellie continued, I had $200,000 in student loans, my mother was sick and needed expensive treatments, and my little brother was about to drop out of college because we couldn't afford tuition. I needed income. Any income. So I applied to be your secretary. But you're a lawyer, Harrison said, still struggling to process it. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something? Ellie met his eyes. Would you have believed me, Mr. Harrison? If I'd told you in my interview that I had a law degree, would you have hired me? Harrison opened his mouth to say yes, then stopped. He thought about his assumptions, his prejudices, the way he dismissed her just hours ago when she tried to help. No, he admitted finally. I probably wouldn't have. I know, Ellie said simply. So I took the job. I kept my head down. I did my work. And I waited, hoping that someday, somehow, I'd get another chance to practice law. She paused, then added, I never expected that chance would come from saving your company. Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Everything he thought he knew, about competence, about qualifications, about who deserved respect and opportunity, was crumbling around him. I insulted you, he said, his back still to her. Earlier today. I said. He couldn't even repeat the words. Yes, Ellie said. You did. Harrison turned around, and for the first time in his professional life, he felt genuinely ashamed. I'm sorry. That was inexcusable. Ellie nodded, acknowledging the apology but not quite accepting it. Not yet. Mr. Harrison, I've been working for you for 18 months. In that time, you've never asked about my education, my background, or my aspirations. You've never seen me as anything more than the person who answers your phones. And the truth is, you're not unique. That's how most people see me. That's why I couldn't get hired as a lawyer in the first place. The words hung in the air, a mirror held up to Harrison's own prejudices and blind spots. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was his chief operating officer. Richard, the board heard about the call with the international partners. They want an emergency meeting. Now. Harrison looked at Ellie. Come with me, he said. Mr. Harrison? The board needs to know what happened on that call. They need to know who saved the deal. He paused. And they need to meet the newest member of our legal team. For the first time, Ellie smiled, a small, genuine smile. All right, she said. Let's go. As they walked toward the elevator, Harrison realized that everything was about to change. Not just for Ellie, and not just for the deal. For everyone. The boardroom was on the 50th floor, the top of Harrison Technologies headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, a massive mahogany table in the center, and 12 leather chairs occupied by 12 men who ran the company alongside Harrison. 12 white men, to be precise. Average age, 58. Combined net worth, over $3 billion. Combined understanding of what was about to happen, 0. Harrison entered with Ellie beside him, and he could feel the shift in the room immediately. The conversation stopped. Eyes turned to them, specifically to her. Confused glances were exchanged. Richard, said Thomas Caldwell, the CFO and Harrison's oldest friend on the board. We heard the call with the international partners went well. Surprisingly well, given this morning's disaster. What changed? Harrison took his seat at the head of the table. Ellie remained standing, positioned slightly behind him, professional and composed as always. The board members were clearly waiting for her to leave. Gentlemen, Harrison began. The reason the call went well is sitting in this room right now. More confused glances. One board member, Gerald Hutchins, VP of Operations, actually looked around as if searching for whoever Harrison was talking about. I'd like to introduce you to Eleanor Vance. Harrison continued. Most of you know her as my secretary. But what you don't know is that Ms. Vance holds a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School, specialized in international corporate law, and just spent the last 2 hours systematically dismantling every legal objection that was about to kill our billion-dollar merger. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the expensive carpet. Then Gerald laughed, a short, dismissive bark. I'm sorry, did you just say your secretary has a law degree from Harvard? That's correct, Harrison said. Richard, Thomas said carefully, like he was talking to someone who'd had a breakdown. Maybe we should have this conversation privately. There's nothing private about it, Harrison interrupted. Ellie, tell them what happened on the call. Ellie stepped forward, and Harrison noticed the slight hesitation before she spoke, not from lack of confidence, but from the weight of 12 skeptical, dismissive stares. The international partners were preparing to withdraw from the merger due to unresolved legal objections. She began, her voice steady. Specifically, German data sovereignty concerns under the Bundesdatenschutzgesetz and Korean intellectual property transfer regulations under the 2021 KFTC amendments. I identified applicable precedents, including the 2019 Bergman v. Datacorp ECJ decision and the 2022 Samsung v. KFTC ruling, and proposed structural modifications to the merger agreement that satisfied both jurisdictions' requirements. Another board member, Richard Chin, head of technology, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. And the German and Korean lawyers just accepted your analysis? Just like that? Dr. Klaus Reinhardt and Ms. Park Ji-won both requested time to review the precedents I cited, Ellie said. But yes, they acknowledged that my proposed solutions represented substantive progress. We have a follow-up call scheduled for tomorrow morning. Gerald laughed again, louder this time. This is ridiculous, Richard. Since when do secretaries understand German contract law and Korean regulatory frameworks? What is this, some kind of joke? It's not a joke, Harrison said, his voice hardening. Ellie graduated in the top 15% of her class at Harvard. She was on law review. She clerked for a federal judge. Her credentials are better than anyone on Jerry's legal team. Then why the hell is she working as your secretary? Thomas asked, genuinely baffled. The question hung in the air. Ellie met Thomas's gaze directly. Because no law firm would hire me, Mr. Caldwell. Despite my qualifications, despite my credentials, I sent out 63 applications and received 0 offers. So I took the only job I could get that would pay my bills. That doesn't make sense, Gerald said, shaking his head. If you're as qualified as Richard says, someone would have hired you. Would they? Ellie asked quietly. Would you have hired me, Mr. Hutchins? If I'd walked into your office for an interview, a young black woman with a Harvard degree, would you have seen a competent lawyer? Or would you have found some reason to go with a better cultural fit? Gerald's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. Ellie's right, Harrison said, cutting him off. And I'm as guilty as anyone. She tried to help me this morning, tried to give me the exact legal precedent we needed, and I told her to stick to making coffee. I insulted her. I dismissed her. Because I assumed that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly understand complex international law. The room was uncomfortable now. A few board members shifted in their seats. Others found interesting things to study on the table in front of them. Richard, Thomas said slowly, I understand you're grateful for her help. But this is a board meeting. Maybe Ms. Vance should wait outside while we discuss. No, Harrison said firmly. She stays. Because I'm proposing that we bring her on as an official legal consultant for the merger negotiations. Gerald exploded. Absolutely not. Richard, we're paying Jerry's firm $5 million. And they were about to let the deal die. Harrison shot back. Jerry and his team spent 2 days researching and came up with nothing. Ellie solved the problem in 2 hours. That's not the point, Gerald insisted. We have procedures, proper channels, established relationships with top-tier firms. Top-tier firms that were failing us, Harrison said. Gentlemen, let me be very clear. The international partners are giving us one more chance. 1. We have a follow-up call tomorrow morning. If we can't satisfy their concerns, they walk, and this company is finished. Now I can go into that call with Jerry's team, the same team that couldn't solve this problem. Or I can go in with the person who actually knows what she's doing. Richard, think about the optics, Richard Chin said. What are the international partners going to think if we show up with your secretary? They already met her. Harrison interrupted. They already know she's brilliant. Dr. Reinhardt himself said he'd rarely encountered such comprehensive command of multi-jurisdictional frameworks. They want her on the call. But we don't know her, Thomas argued. We don't know if we can trust. Trust her with what? Ellie said suddenly, her voice sharp for the first time. Trust me with the legal analysis that I've already provided? Trust me with the solutions that have already gotten the partners back to the negotiating table? Or are you worried about trusting someone who doesn't look like everyone else in this room? The statement landed like a bomb. Several board members started talking at once, defensive and offended. That's completely unfair. Nobody said anything about race. This is about qualifications and procedures. Then let me tell you about qualifications, Ellie said, raising her voice over the protests. She opened her laptop and pulled up her resume on the large screen at the front of the room. Harvard Law School, class of 2023. Top 15%. GPA, 3.87. Law Review, 2 published articles on international corporate governance. Clerkship with Judge Patricia Williams, Federal District Court, Southern District of New York. Bar admission, New York and Massachusetts. Continuing education. I've completed advanced certifications in EU data protection law, East Asian corporate frameworks, and international arbitration. I speak conversational German and basic Korean. And for the last 18 months, while you all assumed I was just answering phones, I've been reading every contract, every legal brief, every regulatory filing that's crossed Mr. Harrison's desk. She paused, looking at each board member in turn. So yes, gentlemen, I am qualified. The question is whether you're willing to look past your assumptions long enough to recognize that. The room was stunned into silence. Harrison watched his board members' faces. Some looked uncomfortable, others defensive, a few genuinely surprised. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice quieter now. Ms. Vance, your credentials are impressive. Truly. But you have to understand, this is highly unusual. We have established processes for vetting legal consultants. Then vet me, Ellie said simply. Call Harvard and confirm my degree. Call Judge Williams and ask about my clerkship. Review my bar standing. Test my knowledge. I'll answer any question you have about international corporate law right now in this room. Gerald scoffed. Fine. Let's test you. Tell me about the implications of the 2021 European Union Foreign Subsidies Regulation on cross-border M&A transactions. Without hesitation, Ellie responded. The FSR, which came into force in July 2023, requires notification to the European Commission of mergers where the parties received financial contributions from non-EU governments exceeding €50 million in the 3 years prior to the transaction. It's designed to prevent foreign state subsidies from distorting the EU market. For our merger with Bright Future International, we need to determine if any of the Korean government's technology development grants to the Korean consortium members qualify as notifiable contributions under Article 4 of the regulation. Gerald blinked. Aye, that's correct. Another board member jumped in. What about the U.S. side? CFI U.S. review implications? The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States will likely require filing because Bright Future's German and Korean entities could be considered foreign persons acquiring control of a U.S. business involved in critical technology, Ellie said immediately. However, our technology doesn't touch on the categories CFI U.S. considers most sensitive: military applications, critical infrastructure, or sensitive personal data. We should be able to secure approval with standard mitigation agreements, though the review process will add approximately 3 to 4 months to the closing timeline. Question after question, they threw everything they could at her. Antitrust implications. Tax structuring. Employment law considerations for the merged workforce. Intellectual property warranties. Environmental compliance requirements in multiple jurisdictions. Ellie answered every single question without notes, without hesitation, often providing more depth and nuance than the board members had expected. After 20 minutes, Richard Chen held up his hand. Okay. Okay, stop. Ms. Vance, you've made your point. You clearly know your material. Thomas rubbed his temples. Richard, she's obviously competent. More than competent. But bringing her on as a consultant for the merger, at this stage, is exactly what we need to do, Harrison said. Gentlemen, we're out of time and out of options. The deal closes Wednesday or not at all. I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you that Ellie will be our lead legal strategist for the final negotiations. Lead strategist? Gerald sputtered. What about Jerry and his team? They'll assist, Harrison said. But Ellie leads. That's non-negotiable. Gerald stood up, his face red. Then I vote no confidence in your judgment, Richard. This is reckless, desperate, and frankly sets a terrible precedent. A precedent for what? Harrison asked coldly. Hiring the most qualified person for the job? Recognizing talent when we see it? Or are you worried about the precedent of admitting that we've been overlooking brilliant people because they don't fit our narrow expectations? Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, then grabbed his briefcase. I'm not going to be part of this disaster. When it fails, and it will fail, I'll be making my concerns known to the shareholders. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The remaining board members exchanged glances. Thomas sighed deeply. Richard, are you absolutely certain about this? Harrison looked at Ellie, who stood there with quiet dignity, having just proven herself a dozen times over to a room full of men who should have been thanking her instead of questioning her. I've never been more certain of anything, Harrison said. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I suppose we'd better make sure she has everything she needs. Ms. Vance, what do you require? Ellie stepped forward, all business now. I'll need full access to all merger documents, including the ones that haven't been shared with your current legal team. I'll need direct communication with Dr. Reinhardt's and Ms. Park's teams. And I'll need at least 2 paralegals who can work through the night. We have 18 hours to draft the addendums I proposed. Done, Harrison said. I'll also need Mr. Harrison to call Jerry and explain the new structure. Ellie continued. He's not going to like it, but I'll need his team's cooperation for document review. Consider it done. And, Ellie added, meeting Harrison's eyes, I'll need you to trust me. When we're in the final negotiations tomorrow, there may be moments where I need to make judgment calls without consulting you first. Can you do that? Harrison thought about the morning, about his dismissive comments, about 18 months of overlooking the brilliant woman who'd been right in front of him. Yes, he said. I can do that. The next 18 hours were a blur. Ellie took over one of the large conference rooms, covering every available surface with documents, legal precedents, and marked-up contracts. 2 paralegals worked alongside her, along with a translator for the German documents, and another for the Korean materials. Harrison checked in periodically, bringing food that Ellie barely touched, watching her work with a focus and intensity that would have put most senior partners to shame. Jerry's team, after a very uncomfortable phone call, grudgingly provided their research files. But as the night wore on, even they started to recognize what Harrison had already seen. Ellie wasn't just competent. She was exceptional. At 3 a.m, Harrison found her still at her laptop, drafting yet another version of the data governance addendum. Ellie, you need to sleep. The call is in 6 hours. I'll sleep after, she said without looking up. This clause has to be perfect. Dr. Reinhardt will scrutinize every word. It's already perfect. You've revised it 5 times. 7 times, she corrected. And it's not perfect yet. The language in Section 4C doesn't quite match the Bergman framework. If the German courts have to interpret this later, the ambiguity could. Ellie. Harrison pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. I need to say something. She finally looked up, exhaustion evident in her eyes. I've been thinking about this morning, Harrison said. About what I said to you. And I realize now that it wasn't just one comment. It was 18 months of comments. 18 months of treating you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter, like you were less than everyone else in this building. Ellie was quiet, waiting. I was wrong, Harrison continued. Not just wrong, I was cruel. And I was blind. And I let my prejudices and assumptions prevent me from seeing what was right in front of me. You could have let me fail today. You could have let the deal collapse and watched me lose everything. And I would have deserved it. I didn't do this for you, Ellie said softly. I did it for the 4,000 employees who would have lost their jobs if the company went under. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, Harrison said. Which makes you a better person than I am. But I want you to know that after tomorrow, after we close this deal, things are going to change. Not just for you. For everyone. I'm going to make sure that we never overlook talent again, that we never let prejudice and assumptions determine who gets opportunities and who doesn't. Ellie smiled, tired but genuine. That's a good start, Mr. Harrison. Richard, he said. Call me Richard. She nodded. Richard. Now, if you don't mind, I have a clause to fix. Harrison left her to her work, and when he finally headed home at 4 a.m, she was still there, still refining, still pushing toward perfection. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. The conference room was packed. Harrison's remaining board members, Jerry's legal team, 3 translators, and Eleanor Vance, sitting directly beside Harrison at the center of the table. The video call connected, and there they were, the full teams from Bright Future International. Dr. Reinhardt, Ms. Park, and at least 20 lawyers, executives, and technical experts behind them. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Vance, Dr. Reinhardt began formally. We have reviewed the precedents you cited and the proposed solutions. My team has prepared a list of concerns and clarifications. We're ready, Ellie said calmly. For the next 6 hours, they went through the merger agreement section by section. Every time a legal issue arose, Ellie had an answer. Every time a new concern was raised, she had already anticipated it and prepared a solution. The Korean team raised questions about technology transfer limitations. Ellie cited 3 relevant cases and proposed specific language that satisfied their requirements. The German team worried about data retention requirements. Ellie pulled up the exact regulatory guidance from the German Federal Commissioner for Data Protection and showed how her proposed framework exceeded the minimum standards. A new player emerged, a representative from Bright Future's Japanese minority stakeholder, who had concerns about how Japanese IP law would interact with the merger. Ellie smoothly pivoted, discussing the 2020 Japanese Patent Act amendments and proposing modifications that protected all parties' interests. Harrison watched in amazement as problem after problem was solved. His expensive legal team sat mostly silent, occasionally providing supporting research when Ellie requested it, but the heavy lifting was all hers. At 2 p.m., Dr. Reinhardt called for a break. His team needed to caucus privately. The video cut out, and the conference room exhaled collectively. My God, Thomas said quietly. She's actually going to pull this off. Jerry's senior partner, Stevens, looked at Harrison with an expression somewhere between embarrassment and awe. Richard, I owe you an apology. When you called yesterday to tell me we'd be working under Ms. Vance's direction, I thought you'd lost your mind. But I've been practicing international corporate law for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone navigate this level of complexity with such precision. One of the Korean translators leaned over to Harrison. Sir, Ms. Park just told her team in Korean that Ms. Vance is the most impressive legal mind she's encountered in a cross-border negotiation. She called her a once-in-a-generation talent. Harrison looked at Ellie, who was calmly reviewing her notes, preparing for whatever came next. How had he not seen this? How had the entire legal industry not seen this? The video call reconnected. Dr. Reinhardt appeared on screen, and for the first time in the entire negotiation, he was smiling. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Vance, he said. My team has reviewed all the proposed modifications. We have consensus. Harrison's heart stopped. The legal objections are resolved. We are prepared to move forward with the merger. The room erupted. Harrison's board members were shaking hands, Jerry's team was applauding, and someone actually cheered. But Harrison was looking at Ellie. She hadn't moved, hadn't celebrated. She just sat there, professional as always, waiting for the next step. However, Dr. Reinhardt continued, and the room quieted again. We have one additional request before final signing. Harrison tensed. What request? Dr. Reinhardt smiled more widely. We would like Ms. Vance to be designated as the merger integration officer for the combined company. The legal framework she has created will require careful implementation, and we want to ensure that the person who designed them is the person overseeing their execution. Harrison looked at Ellie. That's a very senior position. Yes, Ms. Park added, appearing on screen beside Dr. Reinhardt. It would require executive-level authority, significant compensation, and a seat on the new combined company's board. But Ms. Vance has demonstrated that she has the expertise and judgment necessary for the role. We consider her involvement essential to the merger's success. Harrison turned to Ellie. What do you think? For 18 months she'd been asking his permission for everything, when to order lunch, when to schedule meetings, when to speak. Now, the representatives of a billion-dollar international consortium were asking her to help lead their combined company. Ellie met his eyes, and Harrison saw something new there, not just competence or dignity, but power. The power of finally being recognized for what she'd always been. I accept, Ellie said. On one condition. Name it, Dr. Reinhardt said. I want to establish a legal fellowship program within the merged company. A program specifically designed to recruit and develop talented lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds who might otherwise be overlooked by traditional firms. Fully funded, with real opportunities for advancement. Dr. Reinhardt and Ms. Park exchanged glances, then both nodded. Agreed, Dr. Reinhardt said. An excellent proposal, Ms. Vance. Consider it part of the merger terms. Then we have a deal, Ellie said. The final paperwork took another 3 hours, but by 6 p.m. Wednesday evening, it was done. The merger was signed. Harrison Technologies and Bright Future International were now one company, valued at $1.2 billion. And Eleanor Vance had gone from secretary to executive officer in less than 48 hours. The signing ceremony ended at 6:30 p.m. Champagne was poured, hands were shaken, and photographers captured the moment for the press release that would go out the next morning. Dr. Reinhardt and Ms. Park posed for photos with Harrison, and both specifically requested that Ellie be included in every shot. The face of the merger, Dr. Reinhardt called her, raising his glass. As the international partners filed out, heading to their hotels before their flights home the next day, Dr. Reinhardt paused beside Ellie. Ms. Vance, he said quietly, I have been in this business for 33 years. I have worked with hundreds of lawyers from the most prestigious firms in the world. What you demonstrated over the last 2 days was truly extraordinary. Thank you, Dr. Reinhardt, Ellie said. I must ask you something, he continued. A talent like yours does not go unnoticed. Surely you have had many opportunities? Ellie smiled, a small, knowing smile. You would think so, wouldn't you? Dr. Reinhardt studied her face, and understanding slowly dawned. Ah, I see. The legal profession, it seems, is the same everywhere. We claim to value merit, but we often cannot see past our own biases. He shook his head. Their loss is Mr. Harrison's gain. Though I suspect he did not fully appreciate what he had until very recently. Very recently, Ellie confirmed. Well, Dr. Reinhardt extended his hand. I hope you will consider Bright Future's offices in Berlin if you ever wish to practice in Europe. We would be honored to have you. After the international partners left, the office slowly emptied. Board members departed, the legal teams packed up their materials, and the translators headed home. By 8 p.m., only Harrison and Ellie remained in the conference room, surrounded by the debris of 2 days of intense negotiation, empty coffee cups, marked-up contracts, and scattered legal documents. Harrison loosened his tie and sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. We did it, he said, still somewhat in disbelief. You did it, Ellie corrected, organizing documents into neat piles. This was your deal, your company, your vision. No, Harrison said firmly. We did it. And if we're being honest, mostly you. I nearly killed this deal with my arrogance and stupidity. You saved it. Ellie paused in her organizing and looked at him. What happens now, Mr. Harrison? Richard, he reminded her. And what happens now is that we need to discuss your new position. Merger Integration Officer, Executive Level Authority, seat on the board. The international partners weren't just being polite, they meant it. So we need to talk about salary, stock options, benefits, all of it. That sounds like a conversation for tomorrow, Ellie said. Tonight I think I just want to go home and sleep for 12 hours. Fair enough, Harrison said. He stood up, then hesitated. Ellie, before you go, there's something else I need to do. The next morning, Thursday at 10 a.m., Harrison called an emergency board meeting. All remaining board members were required to attend, no exceptions. When they gathered in the boardroom, they found not just Harrison, but Ellie as well, and she was no longer sitting in the back or standing behind anyone. She sat at the table, in a proper board chair, with her laptop and files spread in front of her. Thomas Caldwell arrived last, looking exhausted but relieved. Richard, I assume this is about finalizing the merger integration plan? Not exactly, Harrison said. He stood up, commanding the room's attention. Gentlemen, yesterday we closed the biggest deal in this company's history. We secured our future, protected 4,000 jobs, and positioned ourselves for significant growth. And we did it because one person saw solutions where everyone else saw insurmountable obstacles. The board members nodded, glancing at Ellie with a mixture of respect and residual discomfort. But before we move forward, Harrison continued, his voice hardening, I need to address how we got here. How we almost lost everything because of our own blindness and prejudice. The room went quiet. For 18 months, Harrison said, Eleanor Vance worked in this building. She sat outside my office. She attended meetings, she read our contracts, she understood our business better than most of our executives. And not one person in this company, not one, including me, ever asked about her background, her education, or her capabilities. We saw a young black woman in a secretary's role, and we assumed that's all she could be. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. We nearly lost $1 billion deal because of those assumptions. Harrison continued. Our $5 million legal team couldn't solve the problems that Ellie solved in hours. Dr. Reinhardt called her a once-in-a-generation talent. Ms. Park specifically requested her involvement in the integration. And we would have missed all of it, thrown away all of that brilliance, because we couldn't see past our own biases. Richard Chin cleared his throat. Richard, I think we all learned a valuable lesson. Did we? Harrison interrupted. Did we really? Because I've been thinking about this all night. How many other people in this company are we overlooking? How many talented individuals have we passed over for promotions because they don't fit our narrow definition of what leadership looks like? How many brilliant minds have we dismissed because of their race, their gender, their background? Thomas spoke up, his voice careful. What are you proposing? Harrison turned to Ellie. Why don't you tell them? Ellie opened her laptop and pulled up a presentation on the large screen. Over the past 12 hours, I've drafted a comprehensive proposal for restructuring Harrison Technologies' hiring, promotion, and compensation practices. The board members leaned forward, some curious, others wary. First, Ellie continued, mandatory blind resume reviews for all positions above entry level. Names, photos, and demographic information removed until after the initial screening. Candidates evaluated solely on qualifications and experience. Second, a complete audit of current compensation across the company, broken down by race, gender, and other demographic factors. Any unjustified disparities will be corrected immediately. Third, the legal fellowship program I mentioned to Dr. Reinhardt, but expanded. We'll also create fellowships in engineering, marketing, and operations, specifically targeting talented individuals from underrepresented backgrounds. Fourth, diversity requirements for all executive searches. For every open leadership position, the candidate pool must include qualified individuals from diverse backgrounds. No more all-white, all-male shortlists. Richard Chen frowned. Ms. Vance, these are very aggressive changes. I'm not sure our corporate culture is ready. Your corporate culture almost bankrupted you, Ellie said bluntly. Your culture of hiring and promoting people who look the same, think the same, and come from the same backgrounds created blind spots that nearly destroyed this company. The international partners saved you because they brought diverse perspectives and different ways of thinking. It's time Harrison Technologies did the same. What she said? Harrison added. Everything Ellie just proposed becomes company policy, effective immediately. Any board member who can't support these changes is welcome to submit their resignation. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Thomas spoke. I support it, he said quietly. Richard's right. We've been operating in an echo chamber, and it almost cost us everything. If this company is going to survive in the long term, we need to change. One by one, the other board members voiced their agreement. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly, but all of them ultimately recognizing the truth in what Harrison and Ellie were saying. There's one more thing, Harrison said. He pulled out a formal document and slid it across the table to Ellie. Your new contract. Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Harrison Technologies, effective immediately. Base salary, $450,000. Stock options equivalent to 2% of the company. Full benefits, executive compensation package, and a corner office on this floor. Ellie stared at the document, her composure finally cracking. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Richard, she said softly, this is less than you deserve, Harrison said. But it's a start. Jerry's firm is being let go. You'll build your own legal department, hire your own team, and run it however you see fit. You report directly to me, and you have my full support to do whatever you think is necessary to protect this company. Ellie looked down at the contract, and Harrison saw her blink rapidly, fighting back tears. I also spoke with Gerald Hutchins this morning, Harrison added. He's no longer with the company. I gave him the choice to resign or be terminated for cause. He resigned. Thomas raised his eyebrows. You fired Gerald? I fired a man who made it clear that his prejudices were more important than the company's success, Harrison said. And I made it clear to him, and to everyone else, that there's no place in this organization for that kind of thinking anymore. Ellie picked up the pen and signed the contract. Her hand was steady, but Harrison could see the emotion in her eyes, relief, vindication, and something that looked like hope. Welcome to the executive team, Ms. Vance, Thomas said, extending his hand across the table. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, Ellie said, shaking his hand firmly. And please call me Ellie. The news spread through Harrison Technologies like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that the secretary who used to sit outside the CEO's office was now the executive vice president and general counsel. The reactions varied widely. Some employees were shocked. Others were confused. A few were openly skeptical. But many, especially the women and people of color who'd been quietly working in the company's lower ranks, felt something different. They felt hope. In the marketing department, a young Asian woman named Lisa Chin, no relation to board member Richard Chin, read the company-wide email about the new diversity initiatives and cried at her desk. She'd been passed over for promotion 3 times despite stellar performance reviews, always told she wasn't quite ready, or needed more experience. In engineering, a black software developer named Marcus Williams showed the announcement to his colleagues. Maybe things are actually going to change, he said cautiously. In accounting, a Latina analyst named Sofia Rodriguez immediately started preparing her application for the new fellowship program. She'd been working on her MBA at night for 2 years, hoping it would be enough to break through the ceiling she'd been hitting. The story made the news, too. Not just the business press, which covered the successful merger, but the mainstream media, which was fascinated by the narrative. Secretary with Harvard law degree saves $1 billion deal, Ellie did 3 interviews that first week. In each one, she was careful, measured, and clear about the message she wanted to send. "I'm not unique," she told one reporter. "There are brilliant people everywhere, in secretarial pools, in mailrooms, in entry-level positions, who never get the chance to show what they can do. My story isn't special because of my talents. It's special because I finally got the opportunity to use them." "What would you say to other companies facing similar issues?" another reporter asked. "Look around," Ellie said simply. "Really look. Not at titles or roles or the boxes you've put people in, but at the actual human beings in your organization. Talk to them. Learn about them. You might be surprised by what you find." 3 months later, the merger integration was proceeding smoothly. The new combined company, now called Bright Future Technologies, was exceeding all projections. The stock price had increased by 30%. And Eleanor Vance's legal department was being held up as a model of innovation and efficiency. She'd hired 12 lawyers for her new team. 8 of them were women. 6 were people of color. 3 had been working in non-legal roles at various companies, overlooked and underutilized, until Ellie found them and gave them a chance. The fellowship program had received over 2,000 applications for 20 positions. The selected fellows would start the following month, and Ellie was personally involved in designing their curriculum and mentorship structure. But perhaps the most significant change was the one that happened gradually, almost invisibly. The culture of Harrison Technologies, now Bright Future Technologies, was shifting. It started with hiring practices, then promotion decisions, then the kinds of voices that were heard in meetings, the perspectives that were valued, the ideas that were taken seriously. Marcus Williams, the software developer, was promoted to senior engineer and put in charge of a major product development initiative. Lisa Chen finally got her promotion to marketing manager and immediately started bringing fresh, creative ideas that the department had been lacking. Sofia Rodriguez was accepted into the fellowship program and was already being groomed for a director-level position. The changes rippled outward. Other companies took notice. Articles were written about Bright Future Technologies' transformation. Some criticized it as woke capitalism or diversity theater. But the results spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction was up, innovation was up, and the company was thriving. 6 months after the merger, Harrison stood in the doorway of Ellie's new office, corner office, 50th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows with a stunning view of the city. The office that had once belonged to Gerald Hutchins. Ellie was on the phone, speaking in German to someone from the Berlin office. She gestured for Harrison to come in and sit, continuing her conversation with the fluent confidence of someone completely in her element. When she hung up, Harrison smiled. "I'm still getting used to hearing you speak German. It's like discovering a new superpower every day." Ellie laughed. "I tried to tell you I studied German contract law. You told me to make coffee." "I did," Harrison acknowledged. "And I was an idiot." "Yes," Ellie agreed cheerfully. "You were." 6 months ago, that statement would have been unthinkable, a secretary telling the CEO he was an idiot. But everything had changed. They had something now that they never had before: mutual respect. "I wanted to give you an update," Harrison said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The board approved the expansion of the fellowship program. We're doubling the number of positions next year." "That's wonderful," Ellie said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Dr. Reinhardt called this morning," Harrison continued. "He wants to implement a similar program in the Berlin office. He's asked if you'd be willing to consult on setting it up." "I'd be happy to," Ellie said. "Though I'd want to involve some of our current fellows in the design. They have insights that I might miss." Harrison nodded. This was classic Ellie, always thinking about bringing others along, always looking for ways to expand opportunity beyond herself. "There's something else," Harrison said. "The board met yesterday." "Unofficially." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Unofficially? We wanted to discuss something without making it official until we knew you'd be receptive." Harrison paused. "Ellie, We want you to consider becoming Chief Operating Officer. Ellie's eyes widened. Richard, I've only been General Counsel for 6 months. And in those 6 months, you've transformed the legal department, overseen a complex international merger integration, established 3 new company-wide initiatives, and personally mentored 24 employees. Thomas says you have the best strategic mind he's seen in his 40 years in business. Thomas said that? He did. And he's right. Harrison leaned forward. Ellie, you're not just an excellent lawyer. You're an excellent leader. You see problems before they develop, you find solutions that no one else considers, and you bring out the best in the people around you. Those are the qualities we need in a COO. Ellie sat back in her chair, processing. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. Harrison stood to leave, then paused at the door. 6 months ago, I would have told you that running a major corporation requires a certain kind of person. A certain background, certain experiences, a certain look. He shook his head at his own foolishness. I was so wrong. What it really requires is vision, integrity, and the ability to see potential where others see limitations. You have all of that, Ellie. You've had it all along. I was just too blind to see it. After Harrison left, Ellie sat alone in her office, looking out at the city below. She thought about the girl who'd graduated from Harvard Law full of hope and dreams. The woman who'd sent out 63 applications and received 63 rejections. The secretary who'd sat outside this very office, invisible and overlooked, waiting for a chance that might never come. And she thought about now. About second chances and new beginnings. About the power of seeing people, really seeing them, for who they are and what they can become. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Saw your interview on the news today. Your father would be so proud. I'm proud. Love you, baby girl. Ellie smiled, blinking back tears for the second time in 6 months. 1 year after the merger, Bright Future Technologies held its annual shareholder meeting. Harrison gave his CEO address, reporting record profits, successful product launches, and a corporate culture that was being studied by business schools as a model for innovation and inclusion. But the highlight of the meeting was the announcement everyone had been expecting. It is my great pleasure, Harrison said from the podium, to introduce our new Chief Operating Officer, Eleanor Vance. The applause was thunderous. Shareholders, employees, and board members rose to their feet. Ellie walked to the podium, professional and poised, though Harrison could see the emotion in her eyes. Thank you, she said when the applause finally subsided. A year ago, I was answering phones and scheduling meetings. Today, I'm standing here as your Chief Operating Officer. Some people might call that a fairy tale. But it's not. She paused, looking out at the crowd. It's what happens when we decide to look past our assumptions. When we choose to value competence over comfort, merit over familiarity, and potential over preconceptions. My story isn't about one person's success. It's about what becomes possible when we create systems that allow everyone to succeed. More applause. Ellie waited for it to quiet. Over the past year, we've hired 300 new employees through our revised recruitment process. 45% are women. 38% are people of color. 100% were hired because they were the best candidates for their positions. And our company is stronger, more innovative, and more successful because of them. We've promoted 62 people who had previously been passed over despite strong performance. We've established mentorship programs, fellowship opportunities, and career development initiatives. And we're just getting started. Because here's what I've learned: talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not. Our job, all of our jobs, is to make sure that talent and opportunity meet more often. To make sure that the next brilliant person doesn't have to wait 18 months, or send out 63 applications, or accept a job they're overqualified for just to pay their bills. She looked directly at Harrison. I'm grateful to Richard Harrison for finally giving me a chance. But I'm more grateful for what he did next. He changed the entire system so that others wouldn't need the luck I had. He turned one person's opportunity into everyone's opportunity. That's real leadership. That's real change. The applause was even louder this time. Harrison felt something in his chest. Pride, certainly, but also humility. A year ago, he'd been ready to let prejudice and arrogance destroy everything he'd built. Now, he was watching the woman he dismissed save not just his company, but transform it into something better than he'd ever imagined. After the shareholder meeting, there was a reception. Shareholders, employees, and press mingled in the lobby. Harrison found himself surrounded by well-wishers and people wanting to discuss the company's transformation. But he kept watching Ellie across the room. She was talking with the first cohort of fellowship program graduates, laughing at something one of them said, offering advice to another. Dr. Reinhardt appeared beside Harrison, holding a glass of champagne. "She is remarkable," the German executive said, following Harrison's gaze. "She is," Harrison agreed. "You know," Dr. Reinhardt continued, "when we first met Ms. Vance on that video call, I thought she was simply an unusually competent legal consultant. It was only later that I learned she was your secretary. I must confess I was shocked." "You and me both," Harrison said. "But I have been thinking about it," Dr. Reinhardt said. "And I realize now that I was asking the wrong question. The question is not how was someone so talented working as a secretary. The question is how many others like her are out there, still waiting to be seen." Harrison nodded slowly. "That's the question that keeps me up at night now." "Good," Dr. Reinhardt said. "It should. For all of us." He raised his glass. "To Eleanor Vance. And to all the brilliant people we haven't met yet." "To Ellie," Harrison echoed, raising his own glass. "And to never making the same mistake twice." Across the room, Ellie caught Harrison's eye and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that said everything that needed to be said. They'd come a long way from that morning 18 months ago when he told her to stick to making coffee. They'd both changed. The company had changed. And the ripples of that change were spreading outward, touching lives and opening doors that had been closed for too long. So what's the moral of this story? Is it about giving people a chance? Yes. Is it about overcoming prejudice? Absolutely. Is it about recognizing that talent comes in all colors, all backgrounds, all forms? Without question. But more than that, it's about the cost of our assumptions. Richard Harrison almost lost everything because he couldn't see past his own biases. He almost missed the brilliant woman who was right in front of him for 18 months. How many Richard Harrisons are out there right now, overlooking the Eleanor Vances in their own organizations? How many talented people are sitting in roles beneath their capabilities, waiting for someone to see them, to ask about them, to give them a chance? The truth is, we all have blind spots. We all make assumptions based on appearance, background, or position. But the difference between failure and success, between mediocrity and excellence, often comes down to one simple choice. Will we look past those assumptions, or will we let them limit what we can achieve? Eleanor Vance didn't change. She was brilliant from day one. What changed was that someone finally recognized it, and then had the courage to act on that recognition, and then went even further, changing the entire system so that recognition became the rule, not the exception. That's the real transformation. Not one person getting one opportunity, but creating a world where everyone gets the opportunity to show what they can do. So here's the challenge. Look around you. Really look. At the person answering phones, at the assistant taking notes, at the entry-level employee who seems to understand things a little too well. Ask about their background. Learn about their dreams. Find out what they're capable of. You might discover that the person who can save your company, your project, or your vision has been there all along. You just weren't looking. Don't be Richard Harrison from the beginning of this story. Be Richard Harrison from the end, someone who learned, who changed, and who made sure that one moment of clarity became a lifetime of better choices. Because talent is everywhere. The question is, are you willing to see it?